Hi, so today's video continues to get you prepared for the AQA NEA Power of Persuasion coursework piece. And in this one, we're going to be thinking about the rhetorical persuasive techniques used by writers to try and get you on side. So here are some basic prompts for analysing any kind of written persuasive techniques. First of all, you need to be thinking about the meanings and representations in any text. So putting the language devices to one side, what are the key ideas? What are the key ideas of this writer, and how is the writer representing issues, people, organisation, places, etc.? Secondly, then, you also need to be thinking about context as well. So the primary purpose of the articles that you're looking at are clearly going to be persuasive or argumentative, but there may be some important sneaky secondary purposes going on, like informational or entertainment or explanatory, and they're going to impact on the language. You also need to think about the implied audience. So who is the article written for? Is it written for a left-wing, liberal, progressive broadsheet reader? Is it written for a right-wing, blue-top tabloid reading person? Who is the audience? It's going to impact on the language, isn't it? So the implied target audience is going to be a big contextual factor on the language, as are the genre features. So to what extent is this article that you're reading adhering to your expectations of what you'd normally find in a persuasive text? Then focus on the words and think about how word classes, are there individual word classes which are prominent in this piece? Are there, for example, pre-modifying adjectives which are doing a lot of the heavy lifting in terms of the argument? Or maybe it's the abstract nouns. So what's going on with significant word classes? Think also in terms of Lexis about semantic fields. Obviously the primary semantic field will be the topic of the piece, but there may be important secondary semantic fields as well, which are helping nudge you, the reader, into thinking and feeling in certain ways. There may be words that are chosen with particularly rich connotations, the kind of associative meanings that are going on. There may be euphemistic, i.e. veiled, or dysphomistic, i.e. blunt uses of Lexis. And it may well be that there are some non-literal figurative uses of language. So I'm talking about things like metaphor and personification and simile and imagery and all of those sorts of literary devices which journalists may well use in order to colour our response. And then finally on Lexis, think about the levels of formality as well. So is the level of formality high, mid-range or low? Is it inconsistent? And as I said on the previous video, that's a good place for you to be applying Yauss's levels of formality. Grammar is all about structures. So is there anything going on in the structures of the language which is linking into the ideas? Think, for example, about pronoun usage. So have we got in personal pronouns first person singular pronouns like I, me, and my, or first person plural pronouns like we, us, and our, or second person pronouns like you? So each of these are going to have an important impact on the level of persuasion. Think about the syntax. So is the syntax completely conventional, or in fact have we got inversion going on where particular words are, for example, foregrounded at the beginning of a sentence, or given rhetorical weight by being placed at the end of a sentence? Think also about sentences. So sentence functions, what variations have we got? Is it just declaratives, or do we have imperatives? Do we have interrogatives? Maybe exclamatives. And in terms of sentence types, does it tend to be written in simple, complex, or compound sentences? Do we have non-standard minor sentences? And finally, in terms of grammar, what have we got in terms of modal auxiliary verbs, if any? Have we got kind of weak epistemic modal auxiliary verbs like may, could, or can? Or have we got more certain authoritarian deontic modal auxiliary verbs like will, must or should. And also, when you're looking at verbs, have a look at the verb aspect as well. So have we got any uses of the passive rather than the active voice? Pragmatics is always an interesting area to look at. Basically, the more sophisticated the piece of writing that you're looking at, the richer the pragmatics are likely to be. And if they are rich, there are going to be quite a lot of assumptions being made about the schematic knowledge of the reader. And there may well be, in these complex ones, quite a lot of implicature, i.e. implied readings, meanings that the reader is being assumed to infer. And there may well be intertextuality, so links with other cultural texts. Finally, on our prompt sheets here, we've got discourse as well. Now, we spent the last video thinking about various rhetorical techniques, which were there listed in the AQA textbook on page 266. So I'm talking about things like Polycentricity and litotes and hyperbole. So be on the lookout for those sorts of specific rhetorical techniques. How and why are they being used in the article? Think about the structure of the article as well. So how does the piece begin? How does it then develop into the middle? And how does it move towards its conclusion? So what seems to be the structural and cohesive devices that are tying together this piece? Now let's look at a particular example then. So we're going to the AQA textbook and we're going to the editorial from the Guardian newspaper about Angelina Jolie. It starts with a headline like this. So this is written for the Guardian newspaper, which is the aforementioned liberal, progressive, left-wing broadsheet newspaper. So the focus you would expect would not be so much upon celebrities, but more about ideas and issues. And it's an editorial. So the editorial is sort of like the voice of the institution. It's written by the editor and it kind of represents the overall stance of the newspaper towards a particular topical news item. So there's our headline. Without Angelina Jolie, representatives of 140 countries would not be gathering in London to try to make a difference. Now, think about it. Newspaper headlines, they're often quite compact. They're usually short, elliptical noun phrases. This isn't the case. We have a full standard sentence. So language is being used a bit differently here. Our eye is being drawn to the name of this celebrity, Angelina Jolie, which is maybe a little bit unusual in the Guardian broadsheet newspaper. And we've got an interesting stat here that 140 countries are being represented at this meeting. Well, there are only 195 countries, I think, in the world. So that's 3/4 of the world's countries are being represented here. So it shows the scale and the importance of this particular meeting. And it's showing its colours on the mast straight away. It's straight away arguing that Angelina Jolie is doing something very, very worthwhile. It uses this collocation to make a difference, to signal that this is, not something trivial that's being done. These people are gathering together in order to do something good for the world. Okay, so it's a full standard sentence that's being used rather than some kind of compact elliptical noun phrase. And maybe that demonstrates to us that this is going to be a full complex argument that's being put forward, not a kind of simplified, trivialized argument. We then swoop in to the first sentence, which goes, Angelina Jolie, who is co-hosting the conference on ending sexual violence in conflict that opens today in London, is a highly regarded, very highly paid, Oscar-winning film actor with a burgeoning career as a director. Now, newspaper articles often start by answering basic journalistic questions of what's happened, where, when, to whom. And as you can see here, this is what's going on here, because you've got this subordinate clause here, which is answering these questions. What's happening? There is a conference going on. Where's it happening? It's happening in London. When is it happening? It's happening today. And who's it involving? Well, it's certainly involving Angelina Jolie, and we already know that it's involving these representatives of 140 different countries. So it's ticking the boxes in terms of a piece of journalism. It gives us an introduction to Angelina Jolie in case we're not quite sure who she is. It's doing it using these pre-modifying adjectives and adverbs, highly regarded, very highly paid, so quite dramatic modifiers being used here, and it's a group of three. So in terms of rhetorical techniques, un, deux, trois, you've got three of them there, and you've got another interesting pre-modifying adjective, burgeoning, being used here, which means flourishing. Okay, so quite a high level of sophistication in the language here, which links into the idea that this is written for a left-wing broadsheet newspaper. It then goes on to say she is also hyper beautiful and, killer blow, half of a celebrity couple. To some people, that excludes her from doing pretty well anything that might be described as worthwhile, like being a champion of the millions of women who've been raped, mutilated, and abused, the casual collateral of too many years. Now, as I've put there, if you're going to construct a careful argument and engage your audience, you've got to use quite dramatic lexical and semantic choices, at least initially. So what have we got here in terms of lexis and semantics? In the first line here of the first sentence, we've got an interesting use of an adjective, a post-modifying adjective, hyper beautiful. This represents the lexical creation of affixing. So we've got the post-modifying adjective beautiful that's being affixed with hyper here to give that sense of something dramatic and sensational. And that is allied to equally dramatic use of this idiomatic collocation, killer blow, as well. So it's drawing attention to the fact of her celebrity credentials, that she's very beautiful and she's only half of a celebrity couple. Notice also the use of the copular verb there. Copular verb is usually the verb to be when it's used as a main verb. It brooks no uncertainty. She is blah blah. So that's the use of the copular verb. It conveys a strong sense of certainty. And in the last sentence here, it shows that there are competing arguments going on, that you have some people who think that what she's doing is not worthwhile because she is a celebrity. But on the other hand, what it shows in this last group of clauses here is that she is in fact doing something very, very worthwhile. And she's been called a champion. So it's an interesting abstract noun that's being used here to show that the editor is very supportive of her cause. And the cause here is outlined. We've got another group of three. We've got these passive voice material verbs, raped, mutilated, and abused, that show the scale of the tragedy that's unfolding. And we've also got a phonological device being used here because casual collateral is being used. So the consonantal repetition of the cut sounds at the beginning there show the plosive sounds, give that sense of something that's quite unpleasant. Collateral being one of these euphemistic uses of language to show horrible things happening to civilians. So it's a very engaging and dramatic choice of lexis and semantics in the last sentence of that first paragraph. We then move into the second paragraph. The writer Paul Ferro accuses her and people like her of seeking a landscape on which they can sketch a new personality. On these very pages, she has been accused of vanity and hypocrisy. The cult of celebrity, this narrative implies, is trivial, and the people on whom it is centered are trivial too. They cannot, therefore, engage with the serious except as a tawdry act of self-promotion that ends up trivializing things that actually matter. This is an absurd generalization that damages the many well-intentioned efforts of famous people and belittles the energy, compassion, and commitment that have distinguished Angelina Jolie's campaign. Now, what this is doing is the counter-argument, and so you've got to think, if you're going to be pulling off a really successful persuasive NEA piece, somewhere in your article you have to show that there is a counter argument and then that you can deconstruct it. Okay, so in this particular one, there is a cultural reference to the writer. So again, because this is written for your sort of liberal, progressive broadsheet reader, they'll presumably know who Paul Theroux is, that he's a famous American travel writer who is incidentally the father of Louis Theroux, the documentary writer. And he's quoted. So this shows that the writer here is being fair to the alternative argument. You know, they're trying to be faithful to what they've actually said about them. And they're showing that actually in this very newspaper, so it's shown that The Guardian itself is very keen to put forward different viewpoints from people, because that's why it says on these very pages. And it's putting Angelina Jolie as the focus still on the sentence, because she there is the subject of the sentence. And we've got the repetition of the verbal verb accused here. So it shows that Angelina Jolie is pretty much in the firing line from people, and they accuse her of these. And we've got these abstract nouns, vanity and hypocrisy. And then it tries to sort of voice properly the counter argument. It's saying that she's a celebrity. Celebrity is a bit like a cult. It's trivial, and therefore the people who are called celebrities are trivial as well, and that they trivialize things that matter once they get involved with them. So it really has a good go at airing the argument properly, but it then counters it at the end of the paragraph by going in for the kill and saying this is, and notice again the use of the copula verb, is an absurd generalization. And it again underlines the importance of Angelina Jolie's work with yet another group of three. So energy, compassion, and commitment. And it uses this nice verb distinguished that shows that Angelina Jolie's campaign is something to be celebrated. Okay, so there's an interesting airing there of the counter argument, and you must make sure if you're doing a complex article like this that you are doffing your cap also at the counter argument. It then goes on to do this, as T.S. Eliot put it, to do the right deed for the wrong reason raises an interesting moral question. But if even the fleeting attention of a star like Madonna to, say, extreme poverty in Africa can inspire more people to act to alleviate it, then it's hard to condemn merely because some of the glow of philanthropy will benefit her. There may be an argument too about celebrity oversimplifying complex issues. There may be a debate about the value of particular campaigns, but not surely about the need for attention in the first place. So you can see here how the language is being built up very carefully in not a sensationalized way. Okay, there is a subtlety and sophistication to the argument here that shows that this debate is complex. Okay, and broadly, tabloid newspapers will seek to simplify topics, whereas broadsheet newspapers are more likely to show some of the complexities of this piece. As is shown here by the first sentence, it's another cultural allusion. Maybe your reader knows who this famous 20th century poet is, T.S. Eliot, an anagram of the word toilets, incidentally. And so the first sentence there shows the complexity of the issue. To do the right deed for the wrong reason, it's raising interesting moral questions. And then it takes us into an example of another famous female celebrity, Madonna, and it's running through the arguments there, again, in a very similar way to what the Jolie argument is about. And it's acknowledging that there may be arguments against these sorts of people, that they may be actually oversimplifying complex issues, and indeed there may be debates about, the worth of these particular campaigns. But again, it's your last sentence, which is kind of shepherding the reader to think and feel in a certain kind of way. And it does it through that adverbial surely, as well as the contrastive connective but, which begins the last sentence. We then go into this paragraph that says, Angelina Jolie brings much more than glamour to this week's conference. She has taken a profound interest in the impunity of the men who rape women and children and boys and men as a weapon of war. Her study of the experience of Muslim women in Bosnia, raped repeatedly by Serb soldiers in a determined effort to impregnate them with Christian babies, led to her directorial debut in The Land of Blood and Honey, which was described by The Guardian's reviewer as born out of scrupulous research and deeply held conviction. Okay, so there's some interesting rhetorical techniques that are coming through here with detail about Angelina Jolie herself. We have interesting use of Polycentricity here. So she's taken an interest in these sorts of things going on, the men who rape women and children and boys and men. So you've got these coordinating connectives being used where ordinarily you wouldn't have them. And what that does is that slows us down and gives us a sense of the scales of the horror that's going on, and maybe communicates a sense of surprise as well, that it's not just females who are the victims of these as well, but it's males as well. So we've got Polycentricity, we've got phonological devices being used all the way through this, particularly alliteration, so weapon of war. So you've got the repetition of those approximate consonantal sounds, and you've got other sort of alliterative devices as well, directorial debut as well, and raped repeatedly. So your phonological devices there are giving the sense of, physicality. And you've also got words like study. So this demonstrates that what Angelina Jolie is doing is not half-hearted or light-hearted, that, she has taken a lot of time to do a profound investigation into these horrible events. And so that's connoted by the word study that's used there. And her film is given particular prestige because you've got a quotation from the Guardian reviewer which says that it's born out of scrupulous research and deeply held conviction. So by the time we get to the end of the paragraph, we're pretty much persuaded that Angelina Jolie is very serious on this particular topic and is very, very knowledgeable. We then have a final paragraph. Plenty of controversy surrounds the high ambition of the London conference. There are charges for the co-host William Hague to answer about Britain's laggardly approach to women seeking refuge here who have been victims of sexual violence in conflict. But what is not in doubt is that without the commitment of Angelina Jolie and her determination to find a framework in which justice for the victims become at least possible, representatives of 140 countries would not be gathering in London to try to make a difference. Again, even in your last paragraph here, it's demonstrating that this is a complicated issue. For example, it's showing some kind of criticism about William Hague, who was the Conservative foreign minister, and therefore some people have sought to criticise him for his laggardly approach to women seeking refuge here. But what's interesting, I think, is the way that this article rounds off, because your very last sentence here, the last clause, actually repeats the headline. And so that gives it a rhetorical kind of strength to finish the article. And it also gives us the sense that we as the readers have come full circle. That was how the article began, and this is how it finishes as well. So it ties it off really neatly. And maybe you want to think about that as a rhetorical technique to use if you are, for your NEA, doing a written persuasive article like this. Okay, so hopefully that's given you the idea that, these sorts of articles can be deconstructed in a very kind of systematic way, and it gives you absolutely tons to be writing about in terms of your commentary, as well as tons of techniques that you can be mimicking in your own persuasive text. Now, you obviously need to be researching lots of STAR models, but you need to be going to the right places in order to do that. So here are some sites which might furnish you with really good persuasive techniques to look at in articles. I would always first of all go to Huffington Post. Huffington Post UK, there's Huffington the USA edition as well. So this is a news website that is absolutely full of writers, good writers, who are using all sorts of persuasive techniques in order to persuade you in certain ways. And the beauty of Huffington Post is it's not predominantly left-wing or right-wing, that you've got this range. Okay, so have a look on Huffington Post. The article that we've just looked at today is from The Guardian, so there's your left-leaning broadsheet newspaper. If you want to read something that's more right-wing, i.e. more conservative supporting, you could be reading the Daily Mail, which is a blue-top tabloid newspaper. You could be going to the Daily Mirror if you're wanting to look at a more tabloid approach. So the Daily Mirror is a left-wing, red-top tabloid newspaper. We have the Independent newspaper, which is a more kind of centre-ground broadsheet newspaper. Or you could go to the Daily Express, which is a tabloid newspaper, right-wing, blue-top tabloid newspaper, a bit similar to the Daily Mail, but probably a bit more right-wing. So I would certainly spend a lot of time just casually reading through lots of articles that interest you, and I would start off with Huffington Post. One thing's for sure, if you're going to pull this off as a really successful, convincing NEA persuasive article, you've got to give the sense that you've totally absorbed the kind of persuasive techniques that journalists usually use on these things. Okay, thank you very much.